Hello, everyone. We at Precision Technologies would like to welcome you all to our Data and Analytics panel event. I'm your host, Ninali Sonteke, a BDM at Precision. First of all, thank you so much for joining us today. We are confident that your time will be well spent as we have these amazing data leaders from various industries who will be providing you with great insights to carry forward. Precision Technologies is a full stack IT company providing both solutions and staffing. And as our business within data and analytics continues to grow, we decided it was a great idea to put together this panel discussion to provide our audiences with the content that will help them in their daily work life. Before I proceed further, I'd like to convey you all the opinions that the panelists will be sharing in this event are particularly their own and not a reflection of their company. With that, let me introduce our panelists. Fanny Paitamari, Head of Global Data and Analytics at Bose Corporation. Lee Green, Director of BI and EDW at Tokyo Electron US. Pragya Rajaria, Head of Data Governance at Santander. Mel Reyes, Virtual CIO CISO, formerly with Synchrony. Shardul Desai, Associate Director for Group Chief Risk Office at DTCC, and our moderator, Larry Hemley. Last, I would like to recognize our CEO and my sister, Dipali Kharagban, who will be sharing her thoughts at the closing of the event. We will be having a Q&A session towards the end, so please feel free to enter your questions anytime during the event, and we will try to get them all answered. Please make sure you enter the questions in Q&A section and not in the chat just so we can track them better. That's all from me. Larry, take it away.
Thanks, Nali. Everyone, as we look at the data and analytics landscape, we see new approaches and tools coming into the market every single day. The way we house our data, the way we work with the data, and the limitless possibilities for the business uses and applications of this data are all at the top of tech and business leaders' minds. But you didn't come here to hear from me. So let's jump right into our panel and get the real questions answered. Welcome, panel. So let's kick off real quick. As we all know, we wanted to break the panel discussion up into 3 areas. So real quick for all of our audience, strategic alignment with corporate strategy is kind of one of our key topics that we're covering today. Data modernization, maintenance, and recovery, as well as looking at the governance side of the different areas that we cover. And so with that, let me jump right off. Fani, I wanted to talk about, do organizations understand the value that data brings to the business?
That's definitely a loaded question to begin with, Larry. So let me touch upon it in So let me touch upon it from a couple of ends. If we compare the data evolution from the last decade or maybe 2, we definitely have seen organization adopting data and making data and analytics much more front-seated than the rear-seated or sometimes in the boot, which was the case some time ago. But there's definitely been an increase in significant increase in the way companies and organizations have been looking at data and the value that they're trying to deliver from the data standpoint. The other end is we have seen organizations really look at the digital transformation aspect of it. And there's no digital transformation without data. And some of the organizations are really upfront and realizing the value that investing in data is highly crucial for them to be successful as a digitally transformed organization. So you see 2 ends of the spectrum. One, there's a realization aspect of it and people are really jumping on the board. But then the other side is people are much ahead and they're really playing the game of digital transformation. But I would like to say that there's still a lot of way for growth and improvement in the way organizations really see the value. And if you see all the way from the value chain of data to insights to actions and to eventually the impact and the value that's being generated, there's definitely a significant amount of organizations that could do a lot more than what has been done and what's been doing. With that said, I would definitely leave it on a positive note that there's been an improvement. There's increased interest in terms of how companies want to leverage their main asset of data and how they would really are looking at value generation from those data assets that they're capturing.
Gotcha. Well, so, out of curiosity, when we look at from the panel's perspective, does anybody have any additions that they want to bring to that? Pragya?
So I agree with what Funny highlighted. So it really boils down to how do you align your corporate strategy with your data strategy, okay? In the changing world, today we see people having more and more knowledge about how to utilize data, but how are they implementing it? We cannot have our data strategy go completely haywire from what our corporate strategy is. They have to be tied in together because, like, for example, if an organization is planning a 3-year approach of moving into a direction, they cannot really take that direction until they have the right data handy to be able to take it forward from there, right? So one of the approaches that we do is implement a corporate strategy that's 3 years look forward and align that 3-year look forward corporate strategy with the data strategy to drive it forward. So, it plays a vital role in having the data in your hand to be able to drive the business.
That makes sense. Real quick, Shardul, do you have anything to add to that?
Thanks, Larry. Yeah, I would definitely echo Pragya and Funny. And as we all know that data is no more considered as an information in today's world, right? It's more of the commodity or considered as an asset, right? So when it comes to the data as an asset, technology plays a vital role. So organizations, who really want to, bring the, the innovative, or I would say the informative insights out of their data, they've started realizing the importance of the the strategy, and they have started working on that direction, and they already started looking at how to modernize their the data and their infrastructure need. So there has been tremendous improvement overall, and that has spurred this data innovation and growth in this in overall industry. So I would say data itself is considered as an industry now, which was not a case a decade or two before.
Well, and like thinking about this real quick, Lee, when you think about the value that the data brings, do you think that most of the organizations out there understand the value?
I think it depends on the data patterns and when they use data. I think if an organization has a real good understanding of the day-to-day use, they've already passed through the descriptive understanding of their data sets, and now they're trying to figure out not just what is happening, but what will happen, or why something was well off forecast or well different than it. Those are the groups that are traditionally looking for something more. If you can bring everybody to the same level of at least using data to be a data informed decision, data driven is, I think sometimes it's a little abstract for people, but because I think there's still a lot of intuition and expertise that goes on in these decisions. But data informed, if you can get everybody to that level to where they're using data to help make future decisions, then I think that becomes more apparent. It becomes more apparent, and becomes the threads become more integrated into the corporate strategy. Absolutely.
Mel, what about you?
Yeah, Larry, I want to jump in here because it's interesting. I had this conversation, I think it was late last year, with regards to data. And what I found an article from literally 25, 30 years ago that talked about the exact same issues that some of the companies still have today, right? Being able to create that master data set, or identifying your data, and obviously protecting and everything else. But then to Pragya's point, there's a corporate strategy and there's a data strategy, and there are still companies out there, believe it or not, I kid you not, that don't have those aligned, right? They're too busy getting ahead of themselves, generating a ton of data, whether it's authentication, security, acquisitions, et cetera, that they're making the right investments or strategy to go back and say, how are we going to use that data better so that we can improve our pipelines and everything else? So they're in this churn of just creating new products, and it really not, believe, I know it sounds crazy, but they're still out there. Then you have the companies who are taking advantage of the data and, being data aware, like Lee said, and really kind of leveraging, making the pivots, whether it's product adjustments, funnel adjustments, or other pieces, optimizations. Then you have folks who are using data and they're actually creating a product out of it, tokenizing it, anonymizing it, and actually creating a whole separate value stream from that. At the core, we're still at the same issues we've had for the last 20, 30 years, right? You've got to identify the data. You've got to make sure it's in the right architecture. You got to make sure you have the right strategy. And you got to make sure that you've got the right tools in place. And the tools are just beyond belief now. So, and there's all the strategies that you have to build around that. So there's a corporate strategy and then the strategy that aligns with the data that you have to keep in mind, and you have to get the right implementation and the right path towards that. So 3 years is probably a good journey for you to get to where you narrow that gap between the two.
Absolutely. And I think, just kind of following on to that real quick, Pragya had kind of started talking about this, but how do we align to the data strategy and the corporate strategy? I mean, Pragya brought in some of that. I wanted to see, where do we want to kind of take that topic?
I can start with that, Larry. So, for example, if you're an organization that's dealing with mortgages and you want to span out to insurance, right? You cannot make that movement into insurance unless you have the data analyzed, assessed, evaluated to make sure that you can expand your business, right? So, and it's not a one-day break deal, right? It's a numerous conversations, numerous discussions, months, sometimes years of planning to get to that new business line or acquire a new portfolio, right? And during that process, it's very important to make sure that, hey, you are not venturing into something where it's completely a black zone. You have no idea what you're getting into. So, collecting data, buying data, gathering data, analyzing it, evaluating how your analytical model are going to perform based on the business strategy or decisions you're planning to make, and then venturing into that business is most fruitful in my case. But that wouldn't happen if you do not have a corporate strategy that does not talk to your data strategy. So that's why, every time corporate makes decisions of purchasing new portfolio, merging, acquisitions, you always have to make sure you have data that goes in line with your corporate strategy. So that's the route you always have to take, because most of the organizations, and to Mel's point earlier, we are getting there, but not everybody's there yet, right? So most of the organizations still don't realize that making a drastic move like that is nearly impossible without the right data in hand, right? And bigger organizations, global organizations have gotten to that understanding now. So they start collecting data, analyzing data, making sure they have a data strategy that aligns with the corporate strategy or direction they want to take. And it's a learning process, and I'm sure that industry is picking up to that pace.
Makes sense. Shardo, anything to add?
Yeah, I just want to chime in here that when it comes to integrating the corporate strategy and data strategy, right? What is really essential from the management standpoint is we should be very clear about the goal, the objective, what we are trying to achieve out of the strategy. Because I've seen that many times. It's kind of really difficult unless and until you don't have a clarity about your end goal, right? But as soon as we have the clarity, we should put that together and ensure that we show that there is definite progress if we align our data strategy into corporate strategy, and ensure that we integrate that with our corporate goals. Because when we do that, that's when we will be able to have some benchmark and reference point for us to compare against, and we can set the future direction on that.
Absolutely. Lee, anything for you?
Just something simple. I think it's hard pressed now to have a corporate strategy that, as several people have said, it doesn't rely on data to some extent. I think one of the things that people at least need to rationalize is what is their data capability. If you're not, if part of your corporate strategy is not to have improved data capability, then you may not meet the pieces that require data, right? Do you have the right people? Do you have the right number of skilled people doing the right job? Do you have the right investment in your tool sets and in your technology stack? Do you have a right plan? That honestly should be up there as one of your corporate priorities, along with the other pieces of your strategy. Because if not, your data capability be a boat anchor on your corporate strategy.
Yeah,
Perfect.
Lee, I couldn't agree more. And you summarized it very nicely, right? And I really think that two comments for Pragya and yourself are combined. Number one, you have to create the options of having this data buffet, right? You can't just think about your own data, right? You could have 10 different silos. You have to augment data, right? You have to get outside view. And then to your point, you've got to train, you've got to get the right mindset of the folks that are in-house to be able to do that. So if it's not part of your strategy, if you're not making an investment, right, you're buying augmented data, you're getting the subject matter experts in-house, then if it's not there, then it won't be a good data strategy.
Absolutely.
Yes, I said data buffet. Just quote that one.
Data buffet. So data lake,
augmented data. Yes.
Data house,
Yes.
data buffet. Got it. Got it. So, I mean, like when we talk about driving that data-driven culture, is there something in particular that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about getting to that culture?
Yeah, I can add a comment to the earlier discussion, Larry. I think one thing that's been consistent for at least the last decade in my roles is educating the leadership within the organizations to think that there's no corporate strategy without a data strategy, and there's no organizational metrics or the KPIs that the company really gets measured. We all know that if there's something that can be measured, then you can't actually know whether it's good or bad. So I've spent a lot of time at executive level, C levels, telling people that the leaders of the organizations that you need to have a supporting data strategy for you to be able to see the success that you're anticipating or expecting. It's always been the practice that data comes in afterwards. And the first thing is we have to have a corporate strategy and then really coming across identifying those goals and metrics. But if you don't have a corresponding strategy, then we have seen many times that organizations kind of backtrack on those measures of success that they anticipated or hoped to be successful. Or I've seen data leaders struggle to keep their executive leadership happy by backtracking on those metrics and cooking up numbers. Sad reality, but that happened for some times and within some organizations as well. So to be able to eliminate all of that and to get to your point about being data driven, is really think at that level, right at the top from an organizational standpoint. Do you have an approach? And to Shardul's point, do you know what your measures of success are? What are those value generators? There are organizations which are collecting lots and lots of data, be it to their liking or not, but in today's world, you can't be without collecting the data. But what are we really doing with the data, and what is the eventual impact that you're able to create? What is the eventual value that you're able to create is what drives the overall data-driven mindset and the culture within the organization. I mean, there are organizations which are collecting, but they don't know how to really generate value of it. At the same time, there are organizations, to Mel's point, they're actually building products on top of those data sets and really making money or using the monetization opportunities from those data sets. And there are two ends of the spectrum, and there are middle ones who are trying to make those changes, but the implementation is where they fall apart. And we keep hearing that data projects kind of fail for majority of the organizations because the approach that these organizations take in terms of achieving those successes is not clear, or is not successful because they don't have measures of success, or how are they really measuring the value or the metrics that define success for them?
Absolutely. Anyone else want to jump in on this? Or do we feel that we've covered it good?
I think I would like to talk about something that Lee just mentioned, right? For example, priority. He brought up the word priority. And recently we have seen with the pandemic, right? Corporate priorities shift. For example, if you are in a mortgage or an insurance organization, then how do you make sure your customers are, catered to when they're going through impact, right? So corporate strategy changed. Immediately, there was a need to change the data strategy. How do you look at that data? How do you assess? How do you make sure you're catering to your customers' need? So I think business priority is a very critical point in making sure that the changes in priority to your corporate strategy aligns with your data strategy priorities.
Absolutely. So why don't we kind of jump into real quick, talking about data modernization. So when we talk about this, Lee, I want to direct this question to you real quick. I brought this up a minute ago when Mel was coming up with data buffet. So, when we talk about data warehouse versus data lake versus data lake house versus now we're going to have to use data buffet. So what are the differences and how do you utilize these things?
Sure. I like to think of this as not a technology question, right? So the technologies that have enabled the various flavors of these things have changed dozens of times in the last 10 years, maybe more than that. Right? But what I really like to think of it is around data conformity and use. So what is your pattern for what you're trying to do, and you're likely going to, even if you don't know it, be using a data and design pattern that matches one of these strategies, right? So I like to think of the data lake as the place where you might see likely conform data easier, more available to people, and it's actually kind of the place where you'll see a lot of data scientists, people looking for answers. So I like to think of the data lake as the house of answers. The house of questions. And so they're looking there to try to find how do I solve this problem? They're going to run algorithms and activities hundreds and hundreds of times before they come up with an answer, right? Whereas your data warehouse is the place where you want to have highly conformed, protected data. That is your house of answers. So house of questions is data lake, house of answers is your data warehouse, and in the end, the data warehouse is about about efficiency and people finding the answers to questions that are important to your enterprise fast and easy, and not having to do it all themselves, right? And so in a lot of organizations, you see both. And in my opinion, the lakehouse is a coordinated combination of the two, right? So you can have something that matures in your data lake as you're refining it, and then you want to ensure that it always produces the same output and answer, and you can manage it with the data governance from your data warehouse. So in the end, most organizations have a flavor of all of them. Some of them have them in spades, right? Dozens of warehouses, dozens of lakes. Some of them have them all in the same laptop, so they reside in lots and lots of places. And realistically, you just really have to ask yourself, what am I trying to do with the data? What kind of questions am I trying to answer?
Got it. And Mel, real quick, anything to add there?
Yeah.
You look like
it's
you're
interesting.
chomping at the bit.
The one thing that I think we haven't talked about is the data swamp, right? Because when you get a buffet, you have all the extra clippings, and you've got all the extra meal, food that you haven't eaten, and you've got to put it somewhere. I've seen the attempts at trying to build out subsets of data, all kinds of modeling, and then you just they kind of drift off into the future, or companies who try to go for that moonshot with, leveraging every, factor of data and trying to create the largest model and running it through hours if not days of compute, and then just kind of not getting the right answer, or not getting anything that's valuable, so it goes off into the sunset where nobody claims it, nobody uses it. I think Lee mentioned it, I think Pragya mentioned as well, is you have to have targeted goals, right? Measurable goals, like Fanny said. What is it you're trying to measure? Where is it, and then where's that data? Right? Where is it actually sit? Do you actually have to move it? Can you keep it in the data warehouse, et cetera, et cetera? And really be able to create with the multitude of technologies that are out there, the views, the queries, and all of the key pieces of what you need. I mean, we've got insanely scalable solutions now that we didn't have 10 years ago. We didn't have maybe 5 years ago. And that is part of that, right? You don't have to, eat the whole elephant, right? You can take one bite at a time and, identify your data, where it is, how it is, and then, put the layers in a strategy to do that. But without having that as one of your key drivers, data is gold. Everybody knows it. Everybody's known it for more than 2 decades. The second 1999 kicked into 2000 with the internet boom and the amount of data that we were able to generate on top of the data that we already had. Now we're talking, as a good group of colleagues of mine, mega gigabytes of data. Is what we're generating now. So we have to be able to leverage it, use it where it is, and it's just really a commitment that needs to be made to modernize and to use it.
Okay. And then, like, real quick, Shardul, for you, when I'm looking at this, we're moving into the moving into the modernization, how do you take into account the entire ecosystem? Do you have to look at modern versus legacy, et cetera? Where are we going with this?
Yeah, that's a great question and one of my favorite topics. So, so when it comes to modernization, right? The first question is, my earlier colleagues mentioned that we have to be really aware about our use case, and we have to have a strong understanding on the end goal, right? So let's say we have an organization with the combination of mainframe technologies and old legacy systems, right? And if you're trying to move in the data out of the old system into new system, which is cloud-based and which can give us the excellent amount of compute power and the storage capacity, and time to market is really great, and it can help us increase the overall efficiency to a greater extent, right? So when it comes to that point, we should definitely consider to moving out of the legacy system and modernize that. So there are definitely advantages from the long-term perspective. We can reduce the overhead, when it comes to the infrastructure need of those resources, data centers, and whatnot, right? So there are definitely advantages of moving into modern way to design that, and right, and then we can get the greater amount of scalability and flexibility, right? So, and we can open the data for pretty much everyone in the organization. So we have those capabilities with that. So definitely, when it comes to modernization, we should keep all these factor into consideration. And other thing which I would like to highlight as well, that the more and more technology becomes older, it's harder to replace and harder to get the support and harder to find the resources, right? So it's sooner or later we should really think in a direction of modernizing our data and analytics strategy.
You mentioned the kind of the legacy equipment. Is it, as we look at that modernizing, is there a pattern of behavior that you need to get into? I want to follow on to this real quick, because, like, to give you an idea, and I'll just use something that's not related, people will have a laptop strategy. If they'll go through their laptops every 3 years or 2 years, whatever it is. Do we need some kind of approach like that as well?
Yeah, it all depends. You don't even have to do that. There are various ways we can, there are a plethora of other methods where you can log into the system, your organization, with your own laptop, and you don't even need to use the organization's laptop, right? We can create the virtual boxes, and there are a lot of other technologies are in place right now, which can completely replace the physical equipment need. So, but again, it all depends on the profile which you are in, and the requirement from the organization perspective.
So Larry, were you talking about creating a strategy for
Yeah.
cycling through your data
For the modernization,
progress,
similarly,
tools,
yeah.
and modernization? Right. You have to do that every year. You have to do that every time a new requirement comes through, right? Are you using the best tools? Are you using the latest technology? Has a vendor, added new features that you can benefit from? I find, I said this last year, and I'll keep saying it this year, you have to constantly have vendor reviews and vendor knowledge training, and really stay on top of what they're doing, as well as others. Hopping onto sessions like these and others where you're learning about whether it's tools or strategy, so that you can continue to get educated, bringing in the right subject matter experts. Every year, it's, you can do a major investment every 3 to 4 years, but it really is every year that you need to be able to kind of pull that through. And trying to drive that value. And I'm looking at one of the questions that's in the panel. Try to drive that value. It's absolutely been misaligned, right? Because you've got competing, efforts around the strategy that you have for the 1, 2, 3 year strategy, and how you're going to deliver that, right? So it could be a marketing, it could be a product, it could be a back-end manufacturing strategy that may not align with the whole corporate strategy. So you may be siloed. All of these really need to have a huge umbrella and top-down oversight, but also bottom-up support for those tools and those strategies to be able to work.
Perfect.
Larry,
what about you?
I'd probably
Lee, sorry, go ahead.
No, I would just probably add one thing to maybe take it out of the abstract a little bit. I like to think of what we do as a factory. So if you have a factory and production lines, and you want to try to produce output, you can't modernize that factory very well all at once. Upskill all the people, change out all the equipment, and produce a new product, instantaneously, right? So you have to do it by a plan. And the best answer is an incremental modernization, right? So therefore, the change is managed well, the skills are managed well, and you end up with an output that is better. Now, there are scenarios, obviously, just like your factory, where you've got to do something totally new and different. And in those cases, I would just encourage everybody to recognize that the reason why some of the legacy environment exists and why people are still using it is because because somebody is getting an answer from that environment, or performing a critical business function from that environment. I mean, I'm sure everybody on this call could probably point at business critical access databases and spreadsheets in their company, right? Even no matter how modern your company is. And so so you always have to plan to bring the bottom tier of activity and technology up while you're expanding the top tier. So think about like a factory. You don't want to shut down your factory while you're doing all this as well. Even if you have a 30-year-old bonder that has to run, well, you can't pretend like that doesn't have to run.
Absolutely. Funny, anything for you on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Some great points made and great comments here. One thing I'd like to add, again, I want to pull back connect this discussion back to the earlier question about organizations generating value from data. And one consistent challenge or opportunity that I'm sure most of us can relate to, and in fact, all of us can relate to, is the speed to insights. All organizations are struggling with maintaining speed to insights. There is a heavy demand on answering those key business questions, right, that Mel mentioned earlier. Everybody needs to have those questions clearly identified, but the technologies that we're talking about, be it data warehouse, data lake, consolidated schemas, whatever, right? Those should be the enablers for our questions that we are able to answer, or the questions that are being asked by the business. And eventually the concept of data democratization is picking up speed. I mean, almost every business wants the data to be available, and the speed at which the technology organizations or the data organizations are able to provide this data back to the business to enable them to answer those questions, at the same time create the impact. Eventually, again, tying back to my earlier comments, the impact is what needs to be shown, because we all have been at organizations which are who have been creating, say, thousands and thousands of dashboards, fancy ones, super fast, real-time dashboards, but are they actually converting into the value generation is the eventual question for an organization. And our technology stack, or the ecosystem, or data platform, or data infrastructure ecosystem should really be the enabler for those impacts or the value creations. And we should make sure that, again, to tie back to the question somebody asked on the Q&A panel, is how do we make sure that this technology stack is aligning with the corporate priorities? Is, again, to Pragna's point earlier, we have to be upfront of this, be really proactive in making sure Your corporate strategy knows that there is a corresponding data strategy, and the data strategy includes the platform strategy and your infrastructure strategy. It's a subset of it. In terms of going into the tech stack and the tool sets, there are a multitude of options these days. I mean, there are so many players doing some wonderful works, and it actually gotten broken down into individual task level where you could actually engage with a particular vendor, and most of them are cloud operated. So from keeping the infrastructure refreshed, I see that as a less of a problem these days, because unless until you're still a legacy company being on premise, or you have a compliance restriction to be on premise. But I think most of the work or the heavy lifting is being done by the vendors, but engaging with them, identifying what the right tech stack is. It's very easy I mentioned it at another talk earlier, but the salespeople from these vendors are doing wonderful job, and they're actually are able to sell these products into the businesses who tend to not really understand the complete big picture, or those tools tend to solve their line of businesses and their questions. But we as data leaders should be looking at the umbrella and see, are these tools really serving the entire purposes? And are they really able to create the impact? And those would be the criteria for me when I look at the infrastructure and the tech stack for data.
Absolutely. And so, by the way, you mentioned something that I want to dig into for a second. You mentioned democratization, and what does democratization do to the real-time nature of the data? I mean, because can it be real time if you're trying to share it with everyone?
Absolutely. And democratization is basically getting the right asset. I mean, there are various kinds of democratizations right now. These days, we have data democratization, we have analytics democratization, we have AI democratization, or machine learning democratization, all sorts. Anything that we could get into the hands of people who don't have access to it is what I would see as democratizing the value, or adding the value to it. There are organizations which are still, there are requirements for them to be much more compliant and much more close-knit for the reasons of various sorts in terms of security or being a sensitive nature. But in terms of data sets that are much more open, the idea is, can we provide that access to everybody within the organization who's looking for, at the same time, are able to generate value out of it? I mean, everybody might want access to the kitchen sink, but does it actually create the value is what you should be able to measure as a data leader. And are you able to, again, create the impact? And I've been pleasantly surprised in the past where there are certain people sitting in the corner cubicles, to Lee's point, doing a lot of churning and doing a lot of great analytics things within their own machine. Everything sits on their local machine. And these are the talent that we would want to tap them. And one of the return gifts that we could offer as data leaders is democratize the data for them, give them access and let them play with it and come up with something really great for us as an organization. So yeah, absolutely. Real time. It could be real time, but again, real time, whenever we talk about real time, it involves a lot of cost, it involves a lot of infrastructure, it involves a lot of maintenance. So is it really worth, is the first question that I would ask. Real time, I mean, I can even show real time population growth. There are people who are realizing on that data for generating value, but for me as a product company or a retail company, is that of value or not? I could look at that data set on a monthly basis rather than on a real time basis. So eventually, if it's valuable for you, then yeah, we could democratize that on a real time scale.
Well, and different groups would have different answers to that question, I would assume. Marketing may Absolutely. Have much more of a real-time need in certain situations. So,
Absolutely.
Well, so let's kind of jump into governance and compliance and ethics real quick. So, Mel, when we talk about what role does governance play in data analytics and reporting? Is it important?
If you don't think it's important, I don't know what planet
you're gonna hang up
on,
right
now. Yeah. Just get off the session. It's the guardrails and it's the enabler as well, right? It could be the enabler for a lot of what we do. We have to have the guardrails. There's international regulation, there's local regulation, there's ethics and everything around it. But the compliance and governance piece is part of that implementation strategy, right? You have to make sure you build a center of excellence. You have to make sure you have legal compliance, all of your regulatory specific requirements accounted for well before you start diving into how are we going to group this data? How are we going to pivot this data? You have to have the right checkpoints during and after the models have been created, and definitely after they've been pushed out to re-verify, right? So everything from the augmented data, right? That you may want to purchase or bring in, you have to put compliance around that, right? What's the validity, the source, and then how does that when you combine that with your internal data, does that cause any issues? So it's really critical that you're using the data well, and that you're using the data within the written guidelines that you're supposed to, but also the ethical guidelines that still seem to have a little bit of a nebulous around them. So to me, the most important thing is, are you representing the value of the data? Are you accounting for it? Are you really creating an ecosystem that has the right guardrails so that you can say the decisions you're making, the tools that you're giving, all of the enabling everybody else with, are in line with the legal, national or international guidelines that you're supposed to have. So hugely important. On the flip side, we have to get optimizations and a lot of other process flow components to be able to streamline a lot of that, and to be able to create faster ingestion, faster modeling, faster reviews. So there's different strategies on how to do that, from taking smaller projects as opposed to the moonshots, really kind of going through creating the models, creating the checkpoints, automating some of it. But at the end of the day, compliance has to be there, or you'll be subject to tons of litigation or backlash, branding loss, and all kinds of other issues. Yeah.
Lee, anything for you?
Sure. One of the things I would probably like to do is separate compliance and governance. Okay, so I've worked in aerospace and defense for 15 years, and compliance is about ensuring you're absolutely doing the right thing to the letter of the law, and as Mel stated, that you're avoiding risk, right, with compliance, right? So whereas governance for me is about it's sort of my commitment, right? So I'm going to commit to govern this investment that everyone has made, to ensure that we have the value that everyone's placed, right? And so governance is about ensuring the availability, ensuring the levels of quality, and sometimes when you intermingle compliance and governance, compliance feels like a dirty word, right? And I like to think of collaborative governance as what people want, right? No one wants to go into some promised place of whether it's your lake, your warehouse, your lake house, your swamp, your buffet, any of those places, and not get what they expect, right? They want to be able to go in, and if they expect high quality data that's already curated, that is a consistent answer, they expect that. If they expect access based on the compliance that they perform, in a data lake where there are a lot more access, well, they expect that. And that's what I think data governance gives you. And so if you weight governance too much, then you're probably going to lose value. So, but if you don't do enough, then you'll probably also lose value. So there's probably a sweet spot where most companies need to perform. And your compliance for me is very much it's Boolean. You're meeting the levels you have to meet, or you're not. And whereas governance is a bit more of a spectrum.
What does that balance do if you're off? By the way, something you just said that just made me want to follow up on that.
Balance of governance. So
Yep.
What it means is, okay, you've made good. Some examples I would say is, okay, now your governance process is allowing too much change into your data warehouse. So now all of a sudden some of the things that are being accessed and running business processes are causing problems, not creating answers, or your governance of your data lake is allowing too much trash to get into your data lake, and now it becomes a data swamp, right? It's not valuable anymore. So the governance is about, most times I've felt that the people who use data a lot want governance. They want it because they want to make their job easier, honestly. And so if you're doing too much, I like to be pragmatic about it. So if you're doing too much and their job is harder, well, you're probably not going to get people to play very well in your.
Got it. And so let's just talk real quick, Fonny, for you, how do you plan to get value out of governance, compliance, and ethics?
Yeah, I'd like to give it from two perspectives, right? Inside out and outside in kind of perspectives. So one of the major, or I should say, drivers for calling an organization data driven is, take the example, I'm sure again everybody can relate this to this use case, is the CEO knocks on your door, sends an email asking you for a set of key metrics and the values. And sometimes if the CEO is able to go to only you as the data leader, assuming you have all the access to data and you know what the business is talking about, that's one of the drivers for being a data-driven organization, which means you have a governance practice established, you have high quality, you have high confidence in your data, and you have you at least make the assumption that your CEO is data literate. So when I talk about governance or data governance, I can kind of consider them like 4Ds together, right? One, for you to have data governance, you need high quality data, and you need even with high quality data, you need to have right people to understand it with data literacy. And with the right literacy in place, you're able to democratize the data to the right people, which is in the form of dashboards. It could be in the form of a product or an application, but that's one area that is more internal to an organization, where you're able to be much more confident in passing this the data set, or you're able to sell the data as a product internally to various businesses. It comes in it's most common in large kind of organizations where you have all these different businesses which are much more siloed, and you as the data leader have the responsibility of ensuring there is quality, there is governance, and the right people are getting access to it. And from a compliance standpoint, obviously when you're global in business, you definitely want to be compliant with the likes of GDPRs and CCPAs, etc. And I'm sure all of us have gone through that. The outside in perspective is, if you are more of a B2B or a B2C, it doesn't matter whether you're a B2B or B2C. If I am a customer of a company, say take the Amazons of the world or the Best Buys of the world, and we're taking the retail example here. If I'm a customer and I don't have confidence on how Amazon is keeping my data, or if Amazon is keeping my data safe or not, then I wouldn't have the trust to really go and shop with them. Or same thing with the likes of Best Buy, or for that matter, Facebook too. I mean, as a social media days and the world that we're living in, every platform that we're trying to look after has a data component and the compliance and ethics component. And if I don't have a confidence from a customer standpoint in the provider of that service, then I would be hesitant in terms of creating my subscription with them or being a customer for them. Same thing can apply. It could actually drive your overall, it could create a massive impact on your organization. Take the example again, as Best Buy or some other larger players who are much more in the retail space. If me as a customer don't have confidence, then I would actually want to look at other options to go purchase the same product who are actually out there in the marketplace. And that could impact the overall sales. I mean, it's not just me, but if it gets the traction to create the perception. We have seen some companies go down the wire where customers felt like they had one massive impact. We heard about Capital One data, one security incident kind of kicked a massive flow of threat for the organization, and that actually impacts the customer retention, customer say churn with the organization. So outside in perspective is, make sure you're highly compliant, make sure you're ethical with the way you're capturing the data and you're managing the data. If customer wants to delete it, be ready for being compliant in say deletion of the data as well. But these are the two fronts that I would look at it from a governance, compliance, and ethics standpoint.
And Pragya, what about you when it comes to the value that we can get out of, or the plan to get the value?
So governance, I still remember the day 10 years back. I walked into a meeting and there was somebody who said, oh, we have a cop in the room. Okay. So
do you have a badge?
I don't, but that was the statement made. And that was so true, right? 10 years back, governance was considered the data cops of the world, right? But things have changed since, right? Now businesses and technology have started realizing how important governance is. Mel and Funny, everybody have already alluded to the fact that accuracy is important, quality is important. But what governance also brings to the table is consistency, right? When you have multiple lines of business, using the same data, your report is as good as your data is consistent. Okay. So
Okay.
accuracy is important. Quality is important. Consistency is also important, because if your data is not consistent across the different business lines, the report that one team is generating is way off from the report that another team is generating. And one nice example comes to mind. I remember that two different departments generated a report, and when I looked at the report, it's the same data field, but the values were different. Okay, and I went through the report multiple times to try to understand why is the same field different value, right?
Mhm.
Later, when I actually ran the script to actually find out what was happening, one team had removed a portfolio from the calculation while the other team had not, right? Now, depending on who gets what report in their hands, you're going to make business decisions that are not right, okay? If your CEO, like to Funny's point, gets a report in the hand that is actually targeted or intended to make a business decision, then your business decision is way off because your data is not correct. Okay, so all that is addressed by governance. All that is addressed by governance, and that's why I don't think right now I need a badge to get into a room.
Got it. Got it. So all you have to do is have the threat of data accuracy.
Yeah, data accuracy, data quality, data consistency. There's so many flavors to data, but having all of that flavor right is very important.
Perfect. Lee, what about you when it comes to the plan and the value you're trying to get out of governance and ethics and so on?
Well, I think I'd probably just echo what Pragya was saying, which is you don't need to have enormous systems and enormous teams like you might have. So now I think that depends on, I will take that back a little bit. It depends on your data usage, right? If the data is your asset, like, if you are a financial company, you might have more than if you're a manufacturing company, right? Depending on how you're using the data sets around the governance that's required to really guarantee the outcome. But in the end, I think the mindset of data has changed over the last few years. Lots of new people are getting educated. In some cases, business analysts are now becoming more like data analysts, right? Than they are just business analysts. And so people have a shared interest in the things being right? A lot of times when there's a lot of data silos and people don't care and they just want to seek their one answer, that's a much harder outcome to govern. But if you've now done that investment and got people all kind of rowing in the same direction, I believe that it's kind of like your standard, kind of like the agile methodology, right? We're all doing this together. Your work impacts me, my work impacts you, and so I want you to do it right. So I don't think you always need some oversight, both from technology and people. But I think the mindset has shifted to see the value in data, so the governance is more capable of being successful.
As we were prepping for this panel, one of the things that came to my mind, and as we go into our next question, I want to share this, is that I was sitting in a meeting one day where somebody was quoting a fact that did not seem correct, and they were using it to win their argument, so to speak. And my boss at the time actually uttered the words that 93.7% of all facts are made up. Okay. And and I hope he's on right now, but his key to success on this was by adding 0.7% made it believable. The reason I'm bringing this up is that as we see more and more data being used to influence decisions, there is a predictive aspect to it. There are things that are being learned about all of us. And I wonder, are there ethical concerns with the utilization of the data and analytics? And so Shardul, you mind sharing some insights on that?
Sure. So yeah.
And if you say 0.7%, we're going to know.
So yeah. So first of all, I would say yes, we should definitely have all these proper governance and standards in place, and all these frameworks would not only help producing internal or as well as for external clients. But at the same time, we have some ethical challenges, right? So if I'm a data analyst, and if I have some insights based on my own analysis and prediction, then I kind of like believe in those facts more than the overall organization or the overall company strategy, right? So I can bias that with my own judgment and based on my own opinion, right? So that is one aspect for sure. And so see, other aspect is like the privacy, right? The data is available for everyone, and we all have the atrocious amount of information available, so we can create any type of insights. But at the same time, those insights can sometimes create negative impact as well. So we as an organization need to establish the culture that we accept the all type of scenarios or nuances on those. So that's I would say the key.
So, Lee, for you, on that same note, when you look at the ethical concerns, is there a limit to what we should be doing, or have we even reached the boundaries of discussing that?
I would imagine that it is really determined based on your business, right? So I think, obviously there's a lot of data science in the world and automation in the world that can replace people's jobs in manufacturing, and people have some goals of not doing that. And there's a fine line between that's ethical and not ethical. But if I were actually thinking about how can all the prediction-based activities and the data-based activities that go on in Fonny's space or in the financial space, I have to imagine you have to consider: am I making the right choice with this data, or am I making the opportunistic choice? Right? And so so I would probably throw it over to one of those guys to answer from their perspective. From a manufacturing perspective, our ethicalness is really about efficiency and people's jobs and capability. When we get into how do we use data and when you see others in the B2C world.
Got it. Mel, what about you?
Yeah, this is a one of those hot topics for me that drives me a little crazy. Wrote a little article about it that you can probably find, just a little editorial. So I've been working with a couple groups on what effectively is coined as public intelligence, right? And in there you have the same models of democratization, but also the guardrails, setting standards, right? So you want to continue to disrupt, you want to be able to continue to work within your ecosystem, but you also have to evaluate the risk, right? You have to design it to be safe, to be ethical, to be inclusive, to be adaptive, and mitigate the risk of the designer of a model and the designer of who's using the data removing the bias, right? So removing the as much as you can the components that could lead you to use the data incorrectly or unethically, and I've heard nightmares of what some people want to use the data for, and how to target, and how to effectively exfiltrate, illegally do things, and it's nauseating, because we all have to be accountable, and we have to create international standards. So I am actually working with a couple of groups internationally to work on, maybe not be creating them, but me at least evangelizing and being a part of the effort to say, what are the different frameworks that are out there? How do we find the right ones to implement, whether it's financial services, whether it's insurance, health, or otherwise, so that there is a universal standard on how to use the data. We see the biases everywhere. We see the biases in facial recognition. We see the biases in modeling and lending and everything else, right? So how do you educate? How do you put the checks, the balances, and create a structure so it's a little bit easier to have a uniform conversation about the controls around ethics? Yeah, I could be here all day about this one.
Well, and just to kind of work you up a little bit more on that, but the biases are really, is it the human nature of like when we talk about the data and analytics, the funny part is we're talking about machines, but then the bias is probably a little bit more on the human side.
It's the input, right? It's the input and the mindset of what you're putting in there, right? It's the same conversation that we have with DE&I, right? If you get in a room where everybody thinks the same, right? You've got the same click, you've got the same mindset, you've been doing the same thing over and over and over again, then you're not going to see to the left or to the right. You're not going to see up and down. You're not going to see, it's like, wait, hey, you're not going to ask the questions of, or even know to ask the questions. Hey, will that offend someone? Was that something that we should be considering? And that's where, for me, the use of augmented data, the use of controls, and the use of having a center of excellence that's very diverse will give you that starting block. Having the right structures and the right reviews also give you that, and that's where it drives me crazy, because I don't want to get specific about tools and strategies and everything else here, but I definitely want, from an implementation standpoint, I just get right to that.
Is this where we should post your direct phone number on the screen?
Yes. 1-800 blah blah blah. Right. And I think that's what drives me crazy, is that we can talk about strategies, but a lot of it is on the implementation side.
Perfect. So, Pragya, this one's for you. So what steps do we need to take to address data literacy? I mean, Fani brought that up a moment ago when he was talking. I mean, where do we stand on data literacy?
I think it's just more around education, right? You sit down with your accounting officer and they see numbers. You're trying to make them see data, right? You sit down with your human resource officer and they see ethics and compliance, and you want to show them data, right? So it's tomatoes what it tomatoes. So it's more about use cases. One of the things that I found very helpful when you are sitting down with business folks that do not see the data the way you want them to see, is you present them use cases, right? Sometimes use cases guide them to see, okay, when I see principal balances, you're seeing that value there. That's data, right? For them, it's balances, but for you, it's data, right? So it's very important to make sure your business, your clients, your vendors, your customers, they are able to understand what perspective you bring to the table, and that's data literacy, right? So it's a step-by-step process, but I think it works wonder when you have use cases to support it, to make them realize that they're looking at the same thing, but they're looking at it from a different perspective. And once they understand it, I think it makes governance, data management very easy for business to get through with on a day-to-day basis.
Gotcha. Shardul, what about you?
Yeah, I would completely agree with Pragya, and I would like to add in more thoughts here. So yes, we should provide all sort of training and all the resources from the data literacy standpoint, right? So in today's modern world, there are ample of resources available for any organization to train their any group of resources, right? So one is that right training is required, and second thing is, as Pragya mentioned, we need to have a right and analytical mindset. So management needs to convey that information from top to bottom, that we are here to make the usage of effective use of the data, right? So yes, we all know that we can turn the data into actionable insights, but by what mean and how can we do that? And other challenge which I've always seen, that even though many organizations have good amount of training programs available, there is no implementation. So yes, I got trained into certain tools and technology, but yes, I don't. But I'm sorry, I don't. There is no opportunity for me to implement that. So I think those things, if we think it that way, if we can address those, then it can be really helpful.
Gotcha. Anyone else have an opinion that they want to share?
Yeah, as we all know, 93.7% of people have never heard of a data buffet. So education is key. We really, really have to ensure that I think Charlotte had a great point. Not only is it education, you put it out there and available, but you show what it will bring someone, right? So a couple of things I've seen work for the individual is in a previous company, we targeted everybody with a business analyst title and said, we want to help you all upskill together. So we then offered them a business analytics certificate, which was 9 credit hours from a Penn State course, right? So they were all in the same course. And at one point, of the 150 people that were in the course online, 48 of them were from our company, all at once. And so HR had the investment, they made the investment, and it actually sort of created this network of people that all started to shift their mindset to a new direction at once, right? And then HR actually had the ability to change their title, right? Once they had changed the certification, then they go from a business analyst to a data analyst or a data informatics analyst. And that gave them some people something to strive. The other side of it, I would say, if you actually are now getting away from the individual and you're trying to think of the executive level, one of the ways I've worked on trying to implement literacy is just find the willing. Find the executive that is tied to it, that wants it, and help that person be successful as fast as possible. And you will get, and they will be the person telling the other executives how valuable it is. And you will be surprised at how much jealousy can create data literacy very fast. So be considerate of, you're going to have to take different strategies depending on the audience.
Yeah, actually, just on that note, I went to a session one time that was talking about how to convince people or a group of what they need to do. And it talked a lot about the fact that many of us look at what the term called laggards, which are the people that are the hardest to convert. A lot of people have the belief that you go after them because if you get them, then all the easier people will come along. And what this talked about was that is completely a fallacy. And it talked about the fact that, no, you should take the easiest first, and slowly but surely it will create that jealousy you mentioned for that back half of the audience. So I definitely see that one. One of the things that we talk about a lot is the fact that the talent pool that is out in the market, and Lee, you just kind of touched on it a bit, giving a nice transition there. But the fact that HR is looking at the difference between a business analyst and a data analyst and so on. How do we address the quest for quality talent now?
Oh, I have to jump in on this one.
I'm not sure if you're going to do the quest or the quality.
The question. So let me just go back about 3 seconds. 98.7% of people will fall into peer pressure scenarios and will absolutely public shaming. Hey, what is your team doing? With the data, it becomes, an internal fight for, who's got the better tool, who's delivered more value. So totally agree, Lee. Transitioning into the roles now and into how do you, number one, excellent concept, right? That you talked about with upskilling and reskilling, right? Because when you tie in AI modeling and the fear of losing a job, the next thing you should be thinking about is number one, how do you upskill and reskill, right? And that takes a long journey, right? Some people don't have the data mindset, don't have the data science mindset, data analyst mindset. They don't want to learn R, they don't want to learn Python, they don't want to learn any of these things. So you have to find the right fit. But in order to get there, right, in order for you to transform an organization from being data focused and data centric and, from a business analyst to data analyst, you need the right people in place, right? You need the right strategies, you need the right people. And for you to accelerate, you have to bring in bodies, right? And I think one of the biggest pain points that I've had is, creating a strategy, bringing some bodies, and creating and having an idea of a strategy, bringing in bodies to create a strategy, and then before you're about to execute or in the middle of execution, pulling those external folks out and thinking that your internal folks can continue with the delivery. I've been there probably about at least 3 or 4 times. The investment that you make has to be long term. You cannot just midstream replace bodies, for the sake of saving money. Regardless of what anybody tells you, the 30% you save by taking, whether it was a group or restructured internally to move, folks into other groups, the money that you may save in one division is going to take that, from a headcount standpoint, is going to take 2, 3, 4, 5 times as long, or you might not be able to deliver on what that is. I've been in that. The ramp up to get a qualified data analyst, data engineer, data scientist in some companies could be anywhere from 2 to 6 months because of the demands for qualified, very specific strategic folks. So when you find a group where you have a specific set of resources that are available, that are qualified, that are really, really highly trained, that can really dive in, you've got to hold on to them, because you've got to be able to create the traction until you get that internal ramp up, so that your internal folks have that knowledge transfer, understand the models, understand the tools and the tricks and techniques. That is not a 3-month project that a company goes through, right? So you really, really, really have to make that level of investment and partner with the right folks. I can't say this enough. If you think you're partnering with the right folks and then you want to save money, you're going to fall into a massive pit. So that to me is the biggest, most resounding thing I could say, is get into a great relationship so that you're building those strategies and bringing that in-house.
Perfect. Well, I think Ninali's back. So folks, I think we're heading into Q&A. So let me welcome back Ninali.
Right. Thanks, Larry. So, okay, everyone, it's time to move into Q&A, and please feel free to still send your questions in. We have some here and some offline we got. So let's get right to it. One question that we got offline is, we are a mid-sized organization and don't have a separate data strategy. At what point do you think an organization should have a separate strategy or a team, etc., and who should be the first hires? I think Mel was just talking about something similar.
Yeah, your first hire is you may not even have to hire someone. You may need to just promote someone from within who's a subject matter expert, has technical capabilities, and can help you create the strategy of how to move forward, and then find the right partners, right? If you don't have the knowledge base within the company, right, to make the commitment that now this, half of this person's job is to focus on data, then you have to find the right partners to be able to say, industry specific, to say, at my scale, at my size, for my budget, this is what I'm able to get. Are you, and I think Pragya mentioned it, it's use cases, right? And I say this to every vendor: if you're out there, listen to me here, so you don't have to get on a 30-minute call to hear this. Show me your use cases. What industry specific things have you solved that will help me, so that I can make the connection? Bright lights, pretty pictures, and shiny objects, right? Don't give me the 150 bullet point lists of your capabilities. Talk to me about how you target my issues from a data standpoint that I may have. So, for example, building a new data ecosystem and strategy. Talk to me about how you've done that at my scale, and then you can find those partners. There's plenty of folks that are out there that'll help you build into what you need to do internally first, and then pull it, to look at who's going to manage it, who's going to govern this, and that's where you can start to slice out that strategy.
Thank you,
Ninali, I would say one more kind of thing I've seen in my past that's seen done well in a mid-sized organization, right, is if you can determine which portions of your organization, which people's, which roles work with data full time. They're maybe a business analyst, but they're actually a data analyst and don't know it, or something. But they work with data full time, even if it's manual, uncomfortable, and hard. One way you can make the case and understand what you need to do is what we've done past is we sent a survey out to all of those individuals, trying to understand their time study, like how long is it taking them to find data, to manipulate it, to use it, to put it in a position where it can be valuable. And then you can quickly, I think in this particular case, we sent the survey out to 1,000 people, right? And turns out that like 21 hours a week was finding, manipulating, and adjusting data before they can actually analyze it, right? And so then you can very quickly make the case about a unified approach. I don't know when you actually click over to a team, that's probably company by company. When you have a COE, many, Mel and others have talked about COEs, and a lot of companies grow to that. But even if you're not at that point, you can make the case about a unified investment, right? Or a hybrid team where they meet and consistently try to govern what they have, right? And that's where I think you start to, once you know your baseline, then you can start making better decisions about what you do about your organization.
Thanks, Lee. Okay, let's get to the next question. How have you seen and overcome data modernization or technical gaps as a cause of data strategy misalignment with business strategy? Meaning, when the business wants value out of data that the current technology and skills aren't yet ready to deliver. I think this topic is again Lee's favorite.
Well, I don't think there's an easy answer to that question, honestly. I think it is, we talk about your organization, your technology stack, your goals and your velocity, all those things, are play a piece in how to overcome that problem. I bet if you bring up a, kind of a far reaching topic like data modernization, right? Val brought that up, funny. People want to do those kinds of things, but they often don't have the baseline capabilities and data sets and technology to make it happen. But your business leader has read something on the front of the Wall Street Journal, or your financial leader has decided that that's revenue they can attain. But without some consistently updated and planned structure and activity, you're likely not going to magically attain it. So, and I think Mel had a point, find partners, find people in your business, organize everybody in the right direction, and keep organizing, right? Because I think most everybody kind of falls into a trap related to data and analytics where they say, hey, we're on a project. But once you start the effort to be organized and to have better data sets, you're never done. You are never, ever, ever done, because it's an asset to the company and you must maintain it. And if you think you're going to stop at some point and it's going to live on its own, well, then you already started to fail.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add to Lee's comment is the baseline is highly critical, knowing where you are. Obviously, some organizations tend to overdo just because they don't know what their North Star is. The North Star here is completely being driven by where your company as a whole want to get to. If you're like a mid-sized company, to the earlier question, then are you trying to become a large size company? Is that your goal? Or are you trying to capture the market share? Are you trying to increase the social presence? Whatever it may be. Try and identify what your North Star is and go backtrack that to where you are from a current state standpoint and position yourself to make improvements from that baseline forward. I think that can apply to the earlier question as well as this question. Without knowing your both ends of the spectrum, it's hard to figure out where you are and where you would really want to get to.
Yeah, I would like to just add one comment here. Yeah, so I would definitely echo with Funny here. I've seen many organizations, they really don't know what is the end goal here, right? What is the objective? What are they trying to achieve? So, for an example, if you are, you're answerable to external client and you're generating some sort of insights, right? And that process is taking today with the older system, it's taking about, let's say, 2 hours, right? And four people are working on it manually to check it, right? And verify and make sure everything is good before it goes to client. Now, with the help of new technology, if we are ready to deliver the same output in, let's say, 30 minutes or 15 minutes of time, and it's fully automated, right? So we are also replacing the human need. So technically, you can invest their time in some other activities, right? So as long as you have those type of clarities, that can help you generate a use case to convert your technology from modernization standpoint.
Thanks, Shardul. I think our next question will continue in the same discussion. How do we measure success or ROI to ensure our data strategy is on track? Fanny, would you like
Yeah,
to
I
take
can.
that?
Yeah, sure. So again, going back to my comment about the 4Ds could be one start to in terms of measuring your success. The 4Ds that I mentioned is data governance. Where are you from your governing your data assets? Are you really advanced, or are you just getting started, or are you somewhere in between? Then from a data quality, there are multiple measures to measure the quality of the data. There are data quality management standards out there to really understand where you are from an overall data quality management practice standpoint. Data literacy, of course, is another dimension we touched upon briefly. And do you have your user community that is literate enough to really understand? When we were talking about data literacy, one thing I wanted to comment was interpretation, perception, and perspective are the three killers of data and analytics products, because we are providing access to the data, which could be interpreted in a way that people would want to interpret. They want to perceive it in the way they would like to perceive it, and they want to have a different perspective on that data set. And all of this could be tackled with data literacy. So that's highly key for you to measure in terms of your overall data strategy success. But the other thing is, I mean, more of the traditional metrics that you would want to measure is, okay, how many people are really trained to really be data driven? Can they really drive, ask those right questions and have access to those technology and tool stack? Those are much more traditional and much more granular and tactical, I would say. But at a very high level, if you can start tracking at your data capture, are you able to capture the data from 100 sources or 200 sources or 10 sources? That would be a good metric to see if you're really touching upon your entire ecosystem. And then your overall business user community, are they mature enough in terms of using the data that you're trying to capture and providing it back to them? So various levels of measures and metrics for success for data strategy, but what I threw out were some of them.
Thanks, Fanny. Let's
Yeah,
see.
one thing I would like to add to what Fanny mentioned right now. I've seen a lot of organizations where KRIs and KPIs are implemented in order to measure success, right? And one of the key important factor that I'm trying to sway organizations towards is not having those KPIs and KRIs targeted to the data office, but also to business units, data owners, data producers, because data I get an understanding that most organizations think that the data office is responsible for data strategy, data governance, data management. It's not. It's not. It's high time people realize that data management, data governance, data strategy is based on what they decide, what business decides, right? So implementing KRIs and KPIs on data office is not the right approach. Implementing KPIs and KRIs on the overall organization, on different business units, business line, is what will drive your data strategy forward. Okay, and that's the change. I would like to see coming forward.
Thanks, Vakya. I'll just quickly get to a few more questions. I don't think we'll be able to take all of these, the time constraint. But somebody wants us to do a session on data security. That's a good idea, Larry. Let's take it up. The next question is, what are the major concerns when dealing with large data sets?
Yeah, I can go on that.
Sure,
So,
Shardul.
yeah, I would say the major challenge I've ever seen, I've most of the time seen is the performance, right? And how to store the data and how to make it accessible enough when it comes to, like, the user queries or some market events happen, and if you need an access to that data immediately, that's when that performance comes into picture, right? So given that scenario, how efficiently we can design the data warehouse or materialize view or optimize query, that's a key, that's a key here, right? So because performance plays a vital role. So imagine that you have some news came in the market, and if you are into financial domain, that can change a lot of things, right? So for that type of scenario, I would say performance is the major aspect. That's the major concern.
Thanks, Shraddha. Next one is, do you have any perspective on term data lakehouse and how you have used it within your organization? I think we spoke about it a lot. And anybody still wants to add some? Sure, no problem. In my organization, I have a huge need to overhaul the team skills, and it isn't fun. How do I cope with that and make it fun for all? Dee, would you
I
like to
can
take?
I can
Okay.
jump in. Yeah, so I would say, there are a lot of ways to incentivize the employees, right? One is to bring in the innovative culture, and, encourage them to come up with the innovative ideas and come out of their comfort zone. I've seen many organizations face this challenge. So one is to, management should know how to change in perspective. So change in perspective means, like, today if I'm engaged in my routine activities, then how to make me comfortable, what sort of resources provide will be provided to me so that I can feel comfortable to come out of my comfort zone. And even if despite of failure, I should be able to pick that up, and that can pave the way for my future, and same way for the organization.
Thanks, Shatan. One question we have from Christopher. What are some of the solution gaps and opportunities you all see today in today's suite of BI tools?
Independent of technology, like not to name a particular tool or not, I think flexibility can be kind of the vein of a BI tool's existence, right? A lot of times you'll buy, especially if you have something that's 5 or 6 years old and you've gone through the upgrade path with it, or maybe 10 years old or 12 years old and you've gone through the upgrade path with it. You have this enormous investment in both skills and sunk cost that is hard to sometimes visualize. Now I'm gonna do something different, right? So, and so that's what I would say. There's so many different tools now you can, and they're all trying to sort of uh, reach into other people's capabilities, and you can end up with a cornucopia of capability, where something's kind of a master of none of those things, right? So that's the other thing that I've seen a lot of tool sets nowadays. Flexibility and sort of capability overreach are probably where I would say probably some of the gaps are.
Thanks, Lee. I think I'll give it to Deepali.
I would like to answer one of the questions earlier on the skill set, right?
Okay.
I think we need to have people with the right attitude. Okay. If you have people with the right attitude, you can teach them skills, you can teach them, right? Concepts of data management, concepts of data governance, tools, technology, everything can be taught. What you can't teach them is the right attitude, right? So I go for people with the right attitude, like, let's get it done, guys. If everyone in my team has that attitude, that's all I need, because you can teach them everything else. And I think that's, if you have people with that attitude, it's fun all the way.
That sounds perfect, Pragya. Thank you so much. With that, once again, let me introduce our CEO, Deepali Kharagban, for her closing remarks.
Sure. Thank you. Looks like, this would have gone on and on. Such an interesting and important topic these days, right? And panel members, excellent session, really wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. Looks like we will have to continue to bring in such sessions. Excellent response from the audience and their interest. So thank you, audience, for supporting us. And team, great job putting up this event. Larry, Ninali, excellent moderation. Audience, continue to follow us on our social media, particularly LinkedIn, and stay tuned so that you can take advantage of such interesting sessions and podcast, etc., that we would be doing. With that, we are going to conclude this session. And what Pragya concluded this session with at the end, that is true for any organization, right? So Ninali, make it a point to convey to our team as well. Hire for attitude, not only for skills, right? Excellent way to conclude the session. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone. Thank you.